not winning 90% of your new business because you have some sort of incredible value.
I'm going to take a bit of a different angle.
I've got a budget this big. I'm going to give it to you because you have a really killer plan.
You give a Red Bull to a turtle, what do you expect?
I think that's a dead turtle. So let's move on to...
E-break.
Cheers.
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 Does your current premium finance company lock you into long-term agreements? That's because they don't want you talking to us. At IFS, we win your business the good old-fashioned way, with customer service. I know you don't always have to use a premium finance company, but when you do, you should use IFS. Cheers.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Insurance Point podcast. I'm your host, Tom Reed. And as always, I'm joined by my colleagues, Steve Earle, CEO of Cheap Insurance.
Hello.
Adam Mitchell, CEO of Mitch Insurance.
Hello.
And not present today in body, but definitely in spirit, is Jeff Roy.
Mr. Worldwide.
Mr. Worldwide, CEO of Excalibur Insurance. And we are pleased today to be welcoming Jackson and Jamieson from Quandry. Jackson is the CEO of Quandry, and Jamieson is the president. And we're told they have a mutually assured destruction button where they can fire each other if things don't go the way they want them to go. And with Jeff's absence, I'm going to ask Steve to fill in on our speed round here.
Okay, Jeff Roy speed round. We're going to make it speedier than Jeff would ever do it. Jamieson, what's your favorite Canadian band or artist?
The Tragically Hip.
Nice. Jackson, when you're not working with insurance brokers, what do you do in your spare time?
Normally it would be skiing or hiking, but I'm getting married in July, so right now it's wedding planning, which is taking up all my spare time.
Congratulations.
I might also say goodbye to skiing and hiking. Jamieson, what's your favorite drink? What's your poison, buddy?
I would say a good rum and Coke is my drink of choice.
Jackson's opinion, who's a better athlete?
I think the fact points to me on that one.
Jamieson, who's a better fisherman?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, talking facts, I would love to say myself, but Jackson does have the bigger fish of the two of us with pictures to prove it. So I can say that.
That's as fast as I could make it.
No musical jokes. I missed Jeff already.
Yeah, me too. But
all right. I guess we're going to actually dive into why you're here, aside from your fishing prowess and how many track and field meets you showed up to. What's the origin of Quandry? What can you tell us about that business?
Yeah, so I can kick it off. I think for quite a while, Jackson and I had been interested in starting our own company. And that, for me, really started while I was in university, actually. So I did a degree in computer engineering. And when I was going to school, I worked at a startup for about a year or so. That startup was, they were building autonomous boats to go out on the ocean, actually, and essentially replace 20, 30-person crewed vessels that were going out to do scientific research. And I was one of the first employees hired at that startup, which essentially means you get to do and have to do everything and anything to keep that startup going. And basically out of that, I just realized like how fun and how much of an impact you can have working at a very small company, and fell in love with the idea of a startup, really. And so after working at that startup, went back to university and I was doing my schooling. And from that point on, I lost a lot of interest in my studies themselves and was pretty interested in what can we do to start a company together, basically. And was working with a startup right after school where I was managing a large operations team. Part of that team was doing a lot of high volume, repetitive data entry into a software platform that we couldn't read or write what we wanted through the API. So I originally built a few bots to solve that problem in that business. And this is while Jameson and I were bouncing around these different business ideas to look at something to do on our own. And after implementing those bots in that business, we looked around in that business and there were opportunities to build bots for probably 10 different problems. And then we started talking to friends and past colleagues in other businesses. Didn't matter if it was a tech company or if it was a construction company. Every business we talked to had problems around high volume, repetitive data entry work. It was just a big problem basically everywhere. So we initially saw it as an opportunity to start experimenting around that space. So building bots to solve the problem of high volume repetitive data entry, really for SMBs in Canada is what we were originally looking at. And we started experimenting around that with a robots as a service model. So we build a robot, you license that robot to us on a subscription basis. And we were doing that with the intention of finding a specific vertical somewhere to go really deep on, but we didn't know what that vertical would be. So we started experimenting across a wide range of industries: construction, financial services, healthcare, retail, legal, and then finally insurance. So we had a number of customers in each of those industries. And it was after we worked with our first couple of insurance brokers about 2.5 years ago, one of whom is not on this call today, but usually is. Our very own Jeff Roy was one of our first customers, and another broker, Cornerstone Insurance out of Saskatchewan. And after working with both of them, we just realized that the severity of the pain point in the insurance industry was just much stronger than we saw anywhere else. We were really getting pulled more into insurance through referrals and through the problems that we were solving. So we decided to pivot Quandry after a bit more research about 2.5 years ago to insurance, and specifically to insurance brokers. And that's what we've been doing the last 2.5 years now, is basically robots as a service for the insurance broker space.
So let's talk about your technology. And obviously you're not going to give us all the ins and outs, but a lot of talk about AI out there these days, machine learning. I've heard the term robotic process automation, bots coming, talking about you guys. So tell us, what is that? Where do you guys fit in that spectrum of newer technologies?
Yeah, so we categorize ourselves under essentially intelligent automation. So RPA, AI, ML, machine learning, it's essentially all grouped in to what we're doing. So these software applications that we're integrating into, they don't have an API, or the SDK is pretty limited. And essentially there's just not a very great way for software to get in there and actually provide value, as opposed to the system doing it itself. And so why we call it a bot is we build a software program that gets a username, it gets a password, and it logs in over the user interface the same way a person does, and clicks over here and types over there, and essentially runs that process the same way a person does. Now we take that essentially a step further and use RPA and use the bot as the arms and the legs of the automation that's being done. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of data that's going into those decisions that the bot is making. And so that's where the AI, that's where the ML comes in. So a lot of information comes off of insurance policy documents, the deck pages themselves. And so we spend a lot of resources and a lot of time figuring out how to pull the right data off of those documents and how to use that to drive decisions that the bots then go and do in the BMS systems with the RPA. So it's essentially a combination of many different technologies that are boiled together to provide real tangible value to brokers.
What was it you said you're solving was most of the verticals you saw was like high input, low return transactions? That's what you're solving?
Yeah, so really where we look to apply our technology is high volume, repetitive, manual processes where they're lower value transactions, where there's not a huge amount of value that's being delivered to the end customer through that touch point.
Well, I think you certainly found the right vertical in the insurance broker space with enough work for a while. But have you faced any adversity or challenges that you've had to overcome with respect to delivering for insurance brokers?
Yeah, a few. I think we can probably both talk to a couple of these, but I think initially when coming into the insurance industry, I didn't realize, I don't think either of us realized how complex it was. Before coming into insurance, I thought, you need a policy, you call your broker, you give them some information, bada bing, bada boom, you have a policy at your fingertips. Once you get into the industry and you understand all of the different stakeholders that are involved in all of the different processes that actually touch somebody getting a policy, you realize how deep the industry is and all of the different problems and complexities that come along with that. And that was a pretty steep learning curve for us. It's not something that you can just pick up overnight. Neither of us came from the insurance industry, so it's been a bit of a crash course on understanding that. And I think that's been a big challenge for us coming into the industry, but also something that we've had phenomenal help from all of our early customers and kind of helping us build up that knowledge and that competency internally. Definitely some challenges on the actual deployment side and the technology side. I'll let you speak to those, Jay. Yeah, I think before maybe a few very specific areas, there have been challenges. I think not coming from the industry as well. When you come into insurance, it would be the same with any industry really, and you're looking to apply automation. There are thousands of places that you could put automation in. And so I think it was a challenge for us to really take the time to figure out where we should focus our resources to drive the most real tangible value for brokers. And so trying out different use cases across different customers, talking with as many brokers as we can to ultimately find the use cases we're now working with to provide real value in the automation that we're doing.
I was with another broker council and one of the large aggregator brokers that had a very smart COO there that said they're really embracing RPA, and they had picked up another piece of software. That's sort of, the name. Well, I don't really know that it's a competitor to you. I'll say it's like Automation Anywhere. So it's sort of a like you can pick up and use on your own, or it's meant to be low code. What's your pitch on that angle of like why use Quandary as opposed to what's the other category even called? Like just self-serve or something?
Yeah, like a large self-serve RPA, like a UiPath or an Automation Anywhere. I think it depends on what you're looking for. So for instance, let's say you have a company and you want to implement automations across 20 different use cases or 15 different use cases or something like that. That's not what we do, right? We're not going to come into your business and we're not going to build custom automations in like 15 or 20 different areas. So if you have a really wide breadth of areas where you want to implement these automations, and you have a technical team internally that can stand all of that up and manage it, then it could be the right decision to go with one of these large RPAs. Where Quandary is different is what we do. We focus on a very small number of use cases. So we can come into a brokerage and we can implement that use case in about 30 days or so. So we're focused on 3 use cases. We do those use cases really well, which means we can stand them up really quickly. And we're completely vertical to insurance brokers, right? That's all we do. That's what our entire team is focused on all day, is brokers and brokers' problems. So that means that we can stand these up a lot quicker. And those automations are not just built from the ground up from your business. They're incorporating learnings and exceptions and edge cases from dozens of different brokerages that we've deployed them for. So you end up with a much more comprehensive and robust automation than if you were just building this yourself.
So although I have one bot, it also learns from all the things that Steve's bot does, is what you're saying. There is some connective back tissue there.
Exactly. It's learning from across the deployment of all of those robots and all of the different edge cases that it's seen. So it ends up being much more robust. Like a common criticism of RPA and this type of automation is the brittleness of it, right? So if you implement one of these things and something changes, it takes down the bot, which is true if you're doing that in a for just a couple of different cases. But if you've done that dozens of times, hundreds of times, it's seen so many different edge cases and exceptions that it becomes quite robust, and it takes a lot to then make it ineffective. And how that actually like shakes out from an ROI perspective and from a spend perspective. If you're standing up Automation Anywhere, you either need dedicated resources and a team internally to build and manage these on an ongoing basis. And what customers frequently do is they'll buy that software, they have an internal team, and then they'll use a third-party consultant to then build those automations internally. So you have 3 different stakeholders who are involved in those automations and getting them up. It can become pretty expensive. You can pay pretty high upfront cost to implement that. With Quandary, it's one touch point. We manage the whole thing, and you're just paying a subscription from the start without those large upfront fees.
One of the things that we have talked about amongst the podcast crew is the benefits of getting rid of a lot of that administrative, high volume, repetitive, non-value added tasks, right? When we've talked about it in the sense of having APIs that properly connect back and forth and so on, you guys are coming at a bit of a different perspective. But have you got any business cases that you can share with us to talk about some of the tangible benefits that your clients have seen, even in these still relatively early days?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the most tangible part of it is going to be labor hours repurposed. So there's a lot of benefits that you get from implementing automation. For instance, when you have a bot running versus having a person running, it's more standardized. There's going to be less errors. It can run on a schedule. You can implement standardization across your business. Like there are those key benefits to implementing automation versus a person. But I think right now, with how difficult it is to hire staff, how hard it is to retain staff, like brokers across the country and across the continent, like that's seemingly one of the biggest problems that everybody has. The main benefit that you get out of this is repurposing staff, right? Taking trained staff that you have in your environment that you can repurpose to more valuable and more meaningful work. So for example, we're doing we just did an implementation with a mid-sized brokerage, and across the 3 robots that we currently offer, it will be repurposing about 6 to 7 full-time staff for the price of about 2. So pretty tangible hours that they're getting back into their business that they can repurpose to other areas.
So there's an immediate, what's 1/3? So it's a 4-month payback, right? Assuming that they pay entirely upfront with you guys, but seems like a pretty good ROI to me.
Yeah, it's pretty effective, and obviously you need to be able to repurpose those people into an area where they can then be more valuable and actually, ideally, increase revenue and actually drive your bottom line.
What are you seeing people repurposed in? Like you're seeing these use cases, and I presume you'd be privy to things that make sense as to where do you put people and how many people are repurposing versus laying off or restructuring.
Yeah. So for second part of the question, we haven't seen anybody get laid off from any of the work that we're doing, which I think speaks to how tight the labor market is in the industry right now. Even in the cases where we're repurposing 5 to 8 full-time staff, none of those people are being laid off. They're being repurposed to additional areas. Depends on the business. So it depends where they're putting them to. Some businesses have pretty strong promote from within policies. So you're taking, maybe a junior admin person and you're moving them up into a CSR role, and you're actually moving them onto the revenue side of the business where they're working on retention or maybe on, cross-sell and upsell if you're putting them onto the renewal process. In other areas, they can just be so backlogged on admin and on processing that if we're taking one of those processes off their plate, they're just moving them to another area in the admin or the processing side to typically get through a backlog.
So you've created a suite of things that you feel that here's a process that it doesn't matter who the broker is or what BMS are on. It's common to them. It's a challenge. Could you tell us a little bit about what is it, 3, 4, 5, 6 now that you have that you feel can be deployed in any brokerage and add value?
Yeah. So we've got 3 primary use cases right now. We're working on a few others in the background that we should have released soon, but three core robots right now that we deploy. First one we call the download director. So what that robot does is automates the EDI process. So that's going to be different depending on which BMS system you're on. If you're in Epic or in Power Broker or in SIG, those processes do look slightly different. But what they boil down to is running the download, matching all of the unmatched policies, matching all of the unmatched e-documents, going through invoices, verifying commission amounts, basically that daily download that needs to happen in every single brokerage, typically every day. We have a bot that goes in and processes that work, typically about 90% effective, meaning it can match about 90% of those remaining suspense items. The second one is the eDoc executive. What that robot focuses on is document management within the BMS system. So when those documents actually download into the management system, the eDocs, so the actual PDF documents, it will go into those documents, figure out what they are, open them up, name them, categorize them, put them in the right folder, route them to the right person within the organization. Third one is the renewal reviewer. And what the renewal reviewer will do is analyze policies upon renewal period. So it will look at last year's policy. It will look at this year's policy, the actual PDF documents. It will do a comparison between last year and this year. So show you any major changes, premium increases, coverage changes, change in discounts, basically anything that's different from one policy to the next, it will flag that. And then we'll also look at this year's policy and compare that to what you want to see on that policy. So for instance, if there are upsell or cross-sell opportunities like $1 million liability or missing overland coverage or missing sewer backup, or if there are discounts that customer qualifies for that aren't being listed, like, maybe there'd be a mortgage, there's no mortgagee on the policy and there's no mortgage-free discount. So identifying things like that. So basically flagging upsell opportunities, cross-sell opportunities, missing discounts, risk of churn, things like that upon renewal periods, so that internally a broker staff can just focus on actually using that data and not have people spending time putting all of that data together, which can take anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how complex that policy is.
You've pitched a number of brokers. Some have obviously signed. I presume you haven't got 100% close rate, and some brokers have chosen not to sign. First, let me just check. Have some brokers not signed? Yeah. Okay.
Some we are not at 100%, unfortunately.
Well, maybe I get there one day. Why would a broker, after hearing all this, decide not to engage with you guys? What are the reasons for not engaging?
Yeah, the biggest reason that we see is generally uncertainty about what happens afterwards. So let's take the renewal reviewer as an example. Let's say, 'cause I actually have a very good example of this because this happened not too long ago. It was a fairly large brokerage, around what was it? Maybe 40,000 policies, something like that. So fairly good size, and we were going to be implementing the renewal reviewer. Upon implementation of the renewal reviewer, it was going to be repurposing somewhere to the order of about six to seven full-time staff that were basically doing that entire process internally. So we would have been implementing this bot. It would have been repurposing all of that work, and they would have had 6 additional staff in their business that they could have used in different areas where they were unsure about moving forwards. There's obviously they need to pay for Quandry, and while Quandry is quite a bit cheaper than 6 people doing that work, they're not going to go lay these 6 people off. They wanted to keep them in their business. So for them, understanding exactly where to take those 6 people and repurpose them internally to achieve that additional revenue, they didn't know that off the top of their head. So for them, they wanted to take that back. They wanted to look at this over the next 6 months, over the next 9 months, and then re-engage when they had a better idea of where they would actually be able to reclaim that revenue.
So let me just run those numbers back to you, just make sure I get this right. So you got a 40,000 PIF operation, which, depending on jurisdiction, line of business, blah, 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 I'm going to guess probably is about 40 staff, 35 to 40 staff.
So that's got to be more. That's got to be more. That's got to be like 150.
Yeah, 130 or so.
I did some rough math, and I think you're in the area of, depending upon what your salaries are in processing and so on, but give or take, if it's, maybe correct me on this, guys, it's been a while, if it's 35 or 40 hours a month of work, that's when it becomes a break even. If it's more than 35 in that process.
Maybe chime in there, Steve. Like on the low end, there needs to be a certain amount of volume for it to make sense, right? So the way that we price is on a sliding scale based on PIF, based on the policies that the robot's actually processing. So it does go up and down depending on the size of the brokerage, but there is a floor there. Like you need to have a certain amount of volume in that process for it to make sense. It doesn't need to be massive. Like we've got customers in the 1,500, 2,500 PIF range where they see ROI, but they're probably not going to deploy all three of our robots. I think where you were going with that, Adam, is like percentage of employees or percentage of labor that can be repurposed. If we deploy all three of our robots into a brokerage, we can see 5 to 8% of staff repurposed. Typically, you're going to see larger amounts as the business gets larger as well, because people are more specialized and they are more specifically applied to a certain process. Whereas if you have somebody who's doing half of this and half of this and half of this, whereas on paper you might see that return, but it's not quite as clean in practice.
Do each of the bots do one job, or do they do multiple per?
Each of the bots does one job.
So like I know there's download, and we talked about policy review, renewal, comparison, review, flagging.
Yeah.
I know of the eDoc one as far as cleaning up and redistributing, refiling.
Mm-hmm.
Are those the three, or have some of mine overlapped?
Yeah, those are the three that we have right now.
And so as a business, from an efficiency standpoint, as a Quandary business, you can, I think you said, quickly deploy those things into the next brokerage, the next brokerage, the next. It doesn't take a massive amount. It would be customizing, I guess, up to the BMS layer, as like there's 3 or 4 BMSs and you need to change the paths per, but then would every TAM implication be the same?
Sorry, when you say TAM, do you mean like the BMS system?
Oh, sorry, yeah. Just like would a singular, like if you figured it out for Power Broker, is like the next 5 rollouts of that like 20 minutes?
Yeah, so basically how that works, it's pretty much the same, but there are some small differences. So again, just because we've been talking about it, I'll use the renewal reviewer as an example. So let's say we've deployed the renewal reviewer on Power Broker and we're doing another one on Power Broker, different customer. There could be some minor differences in their environment, in their ecosystem. That stuff is pretty quick to get through. Where you will see differences is on the configuration of the robot. So let's say Steve wants to be aware of, every time that there's no overland coverage on a policy. Let's say Adam doesn't care about overland coverage, but he really wants to be aware of any time there's no mortgage-free discount. And let's say Tom doesn't care about either of those. He just wants to know that GRC, guaranteed replacement cost, is listed on every single policy. Those configurations are different. So it does take a little bit of time up front on the onboarding process to just adjust those configurations and make them the same. And then what takes a bit of time during onboarding is the actual testing of this. So we'll run the robot in your system, Adam. And when we run that, your team then sees what the robot's producing based off those policies. And they're typically going to look at that and they're going to want to change a thing or two. And then they're going to test it again, change a thing or two, test it again, change a thing or two before they're finally ready to roll it out into production. So the differences between brokerages aren't huge, but there are differences in configuration and then some testing during the onboarding period. But typically from kickoff to go live right now, we're for an existing product, 30 to 45 days.
So let me get this straight. So you're approximating something around saving 5 to 8% of staff costs based on these 3 bots that you currently have. Is that right?
If it's all 3 of the bots being deployed, we've seen 5 to 8%.
Okay. What do you think is the and you guys are only, obviously you're not touching every admin task yet. How much more opportunity is there? Like if those 3 bots are carving out 5 to 8% of staff costs, if you were able to automate, or if Quandry, your tool was able to kill all of that administrative stuff, how much are we talking about in your opinion? Like what are you missing, I guess? How much more beyond the 5 to 8% is there for you to capture?
Yeah. So in terms of that actual percentage, it would be an educated guess giving you a number on that. But there is a lot more room to move up. So we've tackled three use cases. one of which is a very significant cost center in the business. The other two that can be significant, but it does depend on brokerages. There are another 3 that we're working on right now that are probably as much time as those first 3 that we're already tackling. And there are another, 3 to 4 that we're looking at that we haven't even started working on yet. So I think, roughly if we assume those are about the same, that brings us up to, 10 plus, maybe to 15% that I don't think is unreasonable to think that we'd be able to carve out.
Yeah. So we're looking at, let's call it 10 to 16 total opportunity, and staff salaries, run 50 plus ish percent. Mm-hmm. So that's, 5 to 8% of revenue essentially is what the ultimate goal could be.
Yeah. And I don't think we necessarily know what the upper limit of those processes are, because at one point we weren't able to automate the renewal review process, but essentially we increased our capabilities of what is possible to automate and have bots do, and now we can automate that process. So I think internally we're also seeing just where we can push the boundaries of what you can have a robot do.
My angle is into the API side, and like, how do you guys see? We're obviously at this interim period where companies are slowly starting to release APIs, and you have a business that has built bridges because there is an absence of APIs. So how do you see your business sort of pivoting and evolving with these things starting to roll out?
I think so. I would say part of our business has been built on bridging that gap where APIs don't exist. However, part of it is kind of independent from that even being a problem. Even if the data transfer was perfect into the BMS system, there's still going to be quite a bit of repetitive work on top of that needs to happen that we're automating right now. So I think there's pieces of that are connected to it, pieces of it that aren't. However, even with this additional connectivity and like as it's happening, we see Quandry's role evolving to more so enable brokers to really tap into that. Like why Quandry exists and what we're focused on is enabling brokers to be more productive, enabling brokers to sell more, enabling brokers to do more with technology when their existing vendors maybe haven't been listening to brokerages as much in the past. And with these APIs that are being built, some of those will be able to be consumed by current vendors, but there's a lot of work that needs to happen beyond just a carrier building an API for Adam or Steve to actually be able to tap into that and use it. And we see Quandry and really just kind of Quandry and other tech vendors in the space, like our job is to build the middleware between the API and the broker to enable it to be consumed easily so that it's actually providing value to the business. It's one thing to have an API, it's another to actually use it and for it to be more effective than the alternative. And that's where we see Quandry being able to step in, is building that middleware so that brokers can use it effectively. And I think the most important piece there is that it's actually providing value to the broker. Like how we look at all of our technology and like what we're building, we don't build anything unless it's delivering like real tangible value to brokers. And that's how we see we could step in there on the API.
You're actually like not in the RPA business. You're in the business improvement business.
Sort of. I think, and I think this actually comes back to what you were saying of like, robots are the best tool right now. Like what we consider our business to be in the business of is providing value to brokerages, right? Allowing them to run their business better, allowing them to do more with less. Whether that's RPA, whether that's AI, whether that's improving their process, the tool to us isn't actually as important as the end outcome that's being delivered. And I think a lot of really good software companies are in the business of just improving other businesses. They do that through software products, but by using a really good software product, you also transform your business internally to accommodate to that software. So I think to your earlier point, Adam, of like what tool you guys use right now, it isn't actually that important to us. And that's why we don't talk about, the RPA or the AI or the OCR that often, because what we really care about is like, what does that actually mean? And like, what's actually being delivered to the broker, regardless of the technology being used.
So let's talk about next steps for you guys. Like where does the future hold for Quandary? Where do you see the opportunities?
In the short term, we've got these 3 robots right now. We're working on a couple more. The onboarding processes for those, while they've become way more efficient than where they were a few months ago and 6 months ago, they're still not nearly as efficient as we want. And one of the most exciting things that we're working on and building out right now, and will have released probably by the end of June, is the ability for brokers to actually self-deploy these robots on their own. Meaning that a broker could, talk to a salesperson, come to the Quandary website through our platform, that they could deploy one of our pre-existing robots only by using a business user, no technical background required, and they could deploy one of these autonomous robots into their existing systems and have that robot processing work, in 48 hours to be able to show them tests. And that's probably the most exciting thing we're working on in the short term. And what that allows brokers to do is to access this a lot faster and have a lot more control over the robots that they'll be deploying. And right now, we're still very much the linchpin to deploying more of these robots. We've got a little bit more work than we can handle. I think over the next couple of years, really where we see Quandary evolving is moving from this world today where we have a couple of different robots doing these different things to a much more comprehensive automation suite for brokerages. So you come to the Quandary platform, and instead of buying the renewal reviewer or buying the eDoc executive or download director or whatever it might be, you deploy Quandary digital worker, right? So you're deploying an autonomous backend processor, and that agent has all of these different capabilities. It can review renewals, it can do eDocs, it can do portals, it can do all of these different things that you may want it to do. And you can just choose those options a la carte, turn them on, turn them off, and basically scale that autonomous agent into your back office so that it can automate a large majority of that backend processing work that you're using at the ease of clicking a button and adjusting some parameters. And that's really what we're moving to over the next few years, is expanding out the scope of that automation and the ease of access.
Awesome.
And I think there's a lot of value and a lot of areas more, I should say, within a broker's lifecycle that there is just insane amounts of value that can be added, and a lot of high volume, repetitive manual processing that's going on. And I don't think there's a future anytime soon where all of that is eliminated by a BMS system. You're always going to have people working within that and working across different software applications. And I think we're really on the cusp of having things working within those applications that are not humans. And that's where the robots and that's where the programs come in. And I think the amount we're going to start seeing this, not just in insurance, but across all industries, is really starting right now.
Is retention important to your brokerage? Of course it is. That's why at IFS, we have a cancellation prevention process. Want more details? Give us a call. I know you don't always use a premium finance company, but when you do, you should use IFS. Cheers.